The wind carried the grit of late summer across Mesa Blanca County, scraping the skin like a reminder that nothing out here was meant to be easy. Rhea Calder let the grit settle on her lips without lifting a hand to wipe it away. The salty dullness steadied her. 10 cows, the whole of what her aunt had left her besides a crooked fence line and a shed that sulked into the earth, stood with heads low against a sky the color of bleached bone. Their hides were dull, their ribs like the lines of a faint map. She said the number out loud as if it were a vow. 10. The word didn't sound like much. It didn't sound like survival. But it was what she had, 10 cows with dull coats and watery eyes, 10 mouths pulling thin grass out of ground that had forgotten a generous season. She'd taken the deed with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She signed it anyway. She needed something to belong to, even a small, wheezing herd would do. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The veterinarian's truck creaked along the Caliche Road and stopped beside Rhea's boots in a settled puff of dust. Dr. Luz Ortega climbed down wearing a hat whose brim had resigned itself to too many storms. She glanced at the herd with a quick, unkindly kind of honesty. "Seen worse," she said. "Seen better, too." "They're all I've got," Rhea replied. "Then we treat them like they're all you've got. Tell me everything." Rhea talked while Ortega moved among the animals with the quiet authority of someone who knew bones by their sound. The cows shifted, tails flicking at flies. Every few breaths, one would lift its head and blink slow, as if the sun had surprised it by still being there. Rhea told Ortega about the inheritance, the call from the county clerk in June, the key in a plain envelope, the drive out to the northern edge of the county where the cottonwoods gave up and the land turned to short grass and low mesquite. She told her about Aunt Fenna, who had lived alone by choice and stubbornness, and died in winter under a sky that did not notice. Ortega listened, hands on hide, fingers parting hair, eyes narrowing as she checked gums, breath, the small language of ears. She took blood. She took silence. Drought stress. Parasites. Malnutrition. Maybe trace element deficiency, Ortega said finally. But something else, too. Something I don't like. She pointed with her chin rather than a finger. "You see where the pasture dips, Rhea? That low patch that looks like a bruise?" Rhea shaded her eyes. She had noticed it the first day, a softer oval of ground where the grass grew thinner and the soil kept its damp longer than it should. The cows drifted toward it, always toward it. "I see it. They go there a lot. They love it," Rhea admitted. "Even when I push them to the west fence, 20 minutes later they're back there, like the ground's got them on a string." Ortega's mouth went thin. "Keep them out of it. I don't know what it is yet, but I don't like it. Could be an old burn pit. Could be a buried tank. Could be nothing. Could be everything." Rhea nodded, and the nod felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The fence around the bruise patch was broken in 3 places. The post tops looked like knuckles rubbed raw. Aunt Fenna had never liked fences, she said a line on paper was enough. But paper lines didn't keep cows from dying. "Start with minerals," Ortega said, writing in a small notebook that looked too clean for the dust it moved through. "Selenium, copper, cobalt blocks. Fresh water, haul it if you have to. I'll rush the labs. I'll be straight with you when I have results." "And if it's worse than vitamins?" Rhea asked. "Then we name the enemy," Ortega said. "It's always better once you can call it something." After the vet's truck left, the sky marched toward evening. The cows drifted back to the bruise patch like sleepwalkers. Rhea cursed the broken fence under her breath and took up the hammer from the shed. Each post she reset felt like setting a bone. The earth resisted. The hammer handle left a welt on her palm. By the time the light thinned to copper, a crooked rectangle stood between the herd and the patch. She slept badly, because in the night the ranch spoke with all the voices she had not learned yet to ignore, the sheet tin that yelped at a wind gust, the coyote yip behind the old arroyo, the long, slow creak from the shed as if the wood itself remembered a wait and asked for it back. She dreamed of a patch of darker ground and something breathing under it. At dawn, one of the 10 didn't get up. It was the yellow-faced cow with a tear-shaped notch in her left ear. Rhea had not named them all yet, but she'd named this one, Dulce, because her face softened when Rhea spoke to her. Now Dulce lay with her legs tucked, head flat on the ground, breath short. When Rhea lifted her head, Dulce's eyes rolled with white. "Not today," Rhea said. "Please not today." She wet Dulce's lips with water and brought sweet feed to Dulce's mouth. The cow chewed because that is what cows do when a human insists and the world is kind for a breath. Then Dulce lay still again, and Rhea could feel the clock of the sun scratching along the morning. She called Ortega. The vet's voice was tired already. "Keep her shaded. If you can get her up, get her up. Don't let her lay too long on one side." "Should I?" Rhea swallowed. "Should I be saying goodbye?" "Not yet," Ortega said, and hung a thread of hope out across the dirt. Rhea tied a tarp to the skeleton of a mesquite and made shade that flapped and worried the air. She talked to Dulce until her throat rasped. Stories about Aunt Fenna's kitchen and the one time her father had taken Rhea to the county fair and they'd stood in the dairy barn breathing the cud-sweet steam of 100 cows. Dulce blinked at the cadence of it. Twice she rolled to her chest. Once she tried to stand and failed. When noon climbed up, Rhea fetched a length of nylon rope and looped it gently around Dulce's chest behind the front legs the way an old neighbor had taught her, Pard Shaw, a man whose years had dried him to gristle and patience. She tied the other end to the hitch of her battered truck and pulled, slow as apology. Dulce rose as if surfacing from too deep a dream, legs trembling, breathing hard through her mouth. Rhea eased the rope loose, put her shoulder against Dulce's flank, and walked her away from the bruise-patch fence while flies traced the foam at the corners of Dulce's lips. They made it 30 yards. Dulce stumbled. Rhea kept her moving because she had learned too young that stopping was sometimes the same as dying. She did not notice at first when the ground softened under their feet. Then she did. The crust of dirt, summer-baked and proud, gave with a sound like a sigh. The two of them, cow and woman, sank to their ankles into something that was not quite mud and not quite any other word Rhea had for the earth. She swore and backed away, tugging Dulce onto firmer ground. When she looked at the place they'd been, the surface had cracked into a spiderweb of thin lines that radiated out from a central oval. The pattern reminded her of a windshield after a stone. A smell crawled up from the crack, bitter, almond-sour and metallic. Rhea gagged. The taste sat on her tongue like a warning. She turned her head, spit into the grass, and tasted it still. The second cow fell that night. Rhea had put the herd into the far pen with hay dragged in from town at scandalous prices. She had counted them and counted them again as if numbers could be a spell. The thunderstorm did not blow in, but it threatened all evening, making far light at the horizon that never touched them. Around 10, the brindled heifer Rhea had not yet learned came apart in the space between breaths, 1 minute chewing, the next staggering, the next on her side with her tongue out. Rhea ran and slid on the dirt next to her, fingers at the neck without knowing what she looked for. There was no snake bite. There was no gunshot. There was just the quick blindness of something that did not announce itself and did not explain. Rhea called Ortega again. It took 3 rings to pick up. "I need you," Rhea said. "I'm with a colic down near Turquoise Crossing," Ortega said, wind in her speaker. "Storm took down a cottonwood across the road and a mile of fences with it. I can be there at first light." "What if I can't wait?" Rhea asked. "Then you do what people here have always done," Ortega said gently, and the gentleness hurt. "You learn as you go. Don't touch the low patch. If you see another hole open, get out of there." When the line went dead, the coyotes sounded nearer than they had any right to be. Rhea sat in the red dust while her breath tried to turn into a kind of sob she did not allow herself. The brindled heifer's body was already going slack, heat loosening its grip. Rhea covered the eyes with an old shirt and sat with her until true dark made shapes into guesses and guesses into fears. She slept in the tack room, because the tack room had walls that did not ask anything of her beyond holding up the roof. She woke to silence she didn't trust. At light, the third cow looked wrong. Not sick the way Dulce had been, flat with the body done working. Not sudden the way the brindled heifer had been, as if frightened out of life. This one stood odd, hollowed, with red around the eyes and the mouth wet. When Rhea moved to check her, the cow stepped back quick, something like a flinch. The smell near her was the same bitter metal. Rhea called Parjaw. He arrived with a thermos and a creak in every joint. Par had worked fence for county in private and nobody and was the kind of local the county relied on without ever admitting it. "Your aunt was a stubborn burr," he said by way of greeting, staring at the bruise patch as if it were a person. "Wouldn't let county trucks in when the crews came during the 80s to check old pits. Said her ground didn't have nothing that needed checking." "What pits?" Rhea asked, the taste in her mouth choosing that moment to come back. Pard tipped his head toward the north. "Old heap leach mine back there. Closed before you were born. Cyanide, they used. They poured it on rocks the way a man waters a flower bed. Said it was safe if it didn't break containment. Said a lot of things in the 80s. Cyanide," Rhea repeated like a word from a language she didn't want to learn. "Is that what this smell is?" Pard sniffed. "Could be. Could be something else. Could be the county's old burn pit for dead cattle from that foot-and-mouth scare that wasn't. Could be Fenna's scrap hole. She buried a lot of things. People bury stories, girl. Then the ground tells them anyway." "What did she bury?" Rhea asked. Pard shrugged, and the shrug looked like apology and old gossip. "Fenna didn't confide. But I'll tell you what she told me the last time we drank coffee on that porch. Said, if the county comes nosing around my fence line, I'll put the key in my niece's hand and let her do the arguing when I'm gone." "Guess she meant you." Rhea didn't feel like arguing. She felt like not losing another cow. They walked the fence together. Pard studied the patched-up section with an eye that read tension like a book. "You did right to block it off," he said. "You got wire?" "Half a spool. It's rusted." "Rusted is honest," Pard said. "Rusted tells you what it is. We'll use it." They added 2 strung lines and a run of barbed wire. They hung a sign Pard had in his truck, "Danger, keep out, County Ordinance 17-33. The sign had mud on it from a different fence in a different season. Pard didn't mention that. He pounded the post with a steadiness that reminded Rhea of a metronome. When they finished, Rhea's knuckles were split and Pard's breath came short. They stood with hands on their hips and watched the cows watch them. "That one there," Pard said, nodding toward Dulce, who had rallied enough to stand under her ugly shade. "She's watching you the way a cow watches a better season. You hang on to that." Rhea would have smiled if her mouth had remembered how. Ortega's call came mid-afternoon. Labs came back. Liver enzymes are off. Selenium deficiency for sure, but that's not the killer. It's acute. There's something else. I need to take samples from that low patch. Don't go near it until I do." "Pard thinks it might be old mine runoff," Rhea said. "Then it's not just your herd," Ortega replied, her voice gone hard in the way of a person who could be soft when it mattered but not when names needed naming. "If that's leachate moving, we call the state. In the county. In the press. They'll love that," Rhea said, glancing toward the road where no one ever passed unless they meant to. "They'll pretend not to. Then they'll show up with clipboards. Or guns," Rhea said, and didn't know until the words left her that she believed it. That evening, the ground proved it did not need rain to come undone. A sound like a long breath moved through the pasture. Rhea and Pard both turned toward it. In the center of the bruise patch, the surface dimpled and then dipped, a neat oval sinking as if something had exhaled beneath. Cracks raced, meeting one another, and the center slumped. Rhea did not say the curse that rose. She put her hand out without looking. Pard's hand found it, warm and certain. "Back up," he said softly, and they did. The oval became a mouth. The mouth became a shallow basin with edges that sloughed quietly in. Something wet glistened, not water exactly but a dark that rejected the sun. The smell came up more sure now, a bitter almond burned with iron. It was not the smell of rot. It was the smell of an argument with the periodic table. Pard put his bandana to his mouth. Don't breathe this if you can help it. I can't help it much, Rhea said, but she lifted her shirt to her nose. They stood and watched the earth open its throat. A herd is a democracy of appetite. Despite the fence, the cows pressed toward the movement like weather. Rhea and Pard worked quick, bodies between the herd and the hole. Pard shouted with a voice that had frightened smarter animals into leaving him alone. Rhea flapped her arms and looked larger than she felt. Dulce, stubborn in recovery, came the closest. Rhea rose on her toes and spoke low, the way she would have to a tired child. Dulce blinked and backed away. Good girl, Rhea whispered. Night came fast when the ground was thinking about swallowing. The bruised patch, a word too small now, sat in the dark like an idea that had taken root. Rhea slept little. Pard stayed the night in his truck with the thermos and a rifle he did not uncase. Coyotes tested the edges of the quiet. At first light, Ortega's truck scraped the road again, this time with a trailer and 2 techs in the back seat. She climbed out fast and all business, eyes on the hole. Masks on, she said, thrusting Rhea and Pard cartridges that smelled faintly of rubber and clean rooms. We do this by the book. What book covers this? Pard asked, but he put his mask on. The one where we try not to do anything stupid before breakfast, Ortega said, then softened when she saw Dulce standing under her flap shade. You're a fighter, she told the cow. I like you. They approached the hole with the care of people who had learned to walk without promising the ground anything. Ortega took readings. One of the techs, Juniper Reese, a young woman whose braid was too neat for this place, lowered a weighted sample jar with a line until it touched the shine at the bottom and filled. The jar came up with liquid the color of weak tea. It hissed against the air. You hear that? Juniper asked. Rhea did. She heard the sound of a substance arguing with oxygen. I'll get pH, Ortega said. Then we call county emergency management. Pard squinted at the far edge of the hole. He was better than any level for telling true. That far lip is thinner, he said. See how it's undercut? Juniper nodded, set her jar in the tray, and stepped right where the lip looked safe. The ground did not care about safe. It had ideas of its own. The lip gave without warning, as if a secret had moved beneath it and asked for room. Juniper dropped sudden and clean down to the chest, arms on the edge. Rhea grabbed the back of her shirt on instinct. Pard grabbed the belt. Ortega shouted, a word that did not translate. The tech's feet bicycled in the air over the dark. The smell came up like a hand. Don't breathe, Ortega said, calm and furious. Do not breathe. Juniper exhaled through her nose. I've got it, she said, voice steady enough to make Rhea believe her. I've got it. They hauled her up as a section of the lip slumped after her, sliding into the hole with a sound like wet sugar collapsing. Rhea landed on her back with Juniper across her knees. For a long second they looked at each other like strangers who had just done something intimate. Then both laughed the stilted laugh that comes after almost. Okay, Ortega said, voice shaking exactly once and then not again. We call the county now. In the state. And if they don't answer my first call, I call them again until they cry. County answered. County came. They arrived with a white truck and a badge that tried to look like it knew more than it did. Sheriff Vern Talley climbed down in iron jeans that did not smell like horse. He was built like a basketball hoop and had the careful smile of a man who practiced it in the mirror. The county emergency manager, Dana Reel, came with a clipboard and hair that had lost a fight with its own clips. What do we have? Talley asked, voice pleasant the way a salesman's is when he's already written the deal in his head. A subsidence event, Ortega said. Chemical exposure risk. My field strips suggest cyanide. I need to confirm, but I don't need to confirm to start keeping people away from it. Cyanide? Dana repeated, pen pausing. Like. Like the mining process, Ortega said. Old heap leach pad is north of here, Sheriff, outside your jurisdiction but within your responsibility as a human. Tally smiled wider. We like responsibility here. Pard coughed behind his mask. It sounded like a comment. Dana was writing now, fast. We can put up barricades. We can inform neighboring landowners. We can, who else do we need? The State Environment Department, Ortega said without apology. And the press. And someone who knows groundwater like a first cousin. Tally's eyes slid toward Rhea. This your place? Rhea nodded. Then you'll want to think about liability. And optics. If the press comes, they won't only ask about the hole. He tipped his head toward the small pen where the herd stood dull and hot. They'll ask about your cattle. I'll say what's true, Rhea said. They're sick. I'm trying to keep them alive. Don't step near my fence unless you mean to help. Tally's eyes flashed with something like annoyance that someone had refused the small harness he was trying to slip over her. Dana looked at the ground. Pard looked at the sky because the sky had better manners than most men. By afternoon, the county had hung war signs around the hole. The signs pointed in every direction that was not the hole. A strip of yellow tape looped the posts like a half-hearted ribbon. Someone set 2 orange cones where a truck might think about driving. Someone else wrote on a form and then copied it to a different form. Juniper and Ortega took more readings. The sun poured heat into the dark. The dark gave the heat back as breath. Rhea kept the herd in the far pen. She counted them until her thoughts turned into numbers and the numbers turned into a kind of prayer. Just before dusk, a crow landed on the fence by the hole and cocked its head. Rhea watched without thinking about why. The crow hopped twice, then lifted off and hovered like a clumsy god over the center. It cawed once, a sound that seemed almost like a dare. It dipped. Its wing brushed the rising breath. It fell as if a string had been cut. The crow's body hit the dirt so neatly that it looked like a staged thing. Dana made a small choking sound. Tally swore, a word that made him sound human for the first time. Ortega's voice was flat. That's not optics. That's proof. They left before full dark. The county set a night patrol, which meant a single deputy whose shoulders slumped when the others were not watching. Ortega promised to return at first light with a state team. Juniper offered Rhea a hug and then did not force it when Rhea did not step forward. Pard stayed. He sat in his truck with the window down and the rifle across the passenger seat. He didn't uncase it. He didn't sleep. Rhea made coffee in the shed that did not deserve it. She brought Pard a cup hot enough to hurt the hand that held it. Your aunt used to sit in that same spot, Pard said without turning. Different chair. Same stubborn back. I'm not my aunt, Rhea said. You're not, Pard agreed. You listen more. That might save a life. Whose? Yours. A cow's. A crow's. Some days the distinction ain't the point. The wind shifted just after midnight. It came now from the north, which meant the smell shuffled its feet and settled on the shed roof. Rhea coughed until her eyes watered. She moved to the porch and breathed through her sleeve. She named the cows to herself in the dark like a catalogue of hope: Dulce, the brindled heifer now a body under a tarp, the little red cow with the star, the big black with the scar on her shoulder, the 2 white-faced heifers who always moved together, the bony Jersey mix who let her scratch the forehead. It made a list. It made a rhythm. It made the hours pass. And all took something small out in the mesquite. The deputy coughed twice and then went quiet. Somewhere on the highway a truck whined like a machine thinking too hard. Just before dawn, the ground at the far side of the hole, beyond the tape, beyond the signs, in a place the county had not imagined, shifted and spit out a thing that was not dirt. Rhea saw it because she was facing that way, because the insomniac deserves a trophy now and then. At first she thought the thing was a rock, but rocks do not glisten bone-white at that hour. It was smooth, curved, with seams that made a geometry she knew in her hands before she knew it in her head. She stood without thinking. Her body moved and her mind followed. She went to the edge despite every instruction she had given herself and others. She went because curiosity owns stronger leashes than fear in some lights. Pard called her name, the warning carried on a breath. Rhea lifted a hand without turning, not to quiet him but to promise she would stop if stopping became the right thing. She did not stop. The thing lay half in the dirt, half in air for 1 second before the earth changed its mind again and tried to take it back. Rhea lunged, because the impulse to grab what the ground rejects runs older than her family. She reached without thinking of chemicals or breath or the way some holes hold on. Her fingers closed around the thing. It was heavier than she expected and warm like something that had been held. She pulled, heel digging, muscles talking louder than farewell. The thing came free with a slick sound that would visit her later in nightmares. She stumbled back and fell onto her backside and cradled the thing in her lap because hands cradle when they don't know what else to do. Pard was at her side in a blink. He did not touch the thing. He looked at it. It was a human jawbone, clean-edged, with a gold dental crown that caught the new sun and made a joke of light. There was a ball chain threaded through the bone as if it were a stick on a child's necklace. On the chain was a badge the size of a silver dollar, its face half-eaten by whatever had lived in that hole. The part of the badge that was not eaten carried letters she could read despite the corrosion. Sheriff, Mesa Blanca County. Pard made a quiet sound like a prayer told to a wall. Rhea's breath came quick and hard through the mask she had not bothered to put back on. The taste of almonds rushed the back of her throat, but she did not register it. She registered the weight. "Is it Tally's?" she asked, and hated herself for saying his name like she had wanted it to be his. Pard shook his head. His face had aged 10 years in 1 minute. "That badge is old." "How old?" He didn't answer. He reached into his back pocket and brought out a blue handkerchief with white stars. He wrapped the jaw on the badge like a fragile thing in a bomb. Dawn spilled fully across the field then, making the bruise patch look innocent the way a wound can look polite when it's dressed. The deputy noticed the movement and ran toward them. He stopped when he saw what Rhea held. He put his hand on his gun because men who don't know what to do touch the thing that promises decisions. Ortega's truck hammered the road 5 minutes later, earlier than she had promised, because some mornings ask you to hurry. Juniper's braid was crooked now. Dana's county truck followed. Sheriff Tally's lights stuttered against the mesquite like a celebration for the wrong parade. "What is it?" Ortega called as she climbed down. Rhea did not trust her voice. She held up the bundle. Juniper inhaled and did not let the breath out for too long. "Oh," she said, and the O carried more syllables than it should. Tally's boots crunched the dirt. He took the jaw and badge in his hands with a care Rhea would not have credited him. He turned the badge under the light. The gold tooth flashed like a cheap miracle. "Where?" he asked. "There," Rhea said, pointing to the lip at the far side, to the place the county tape did not reach, to the spot that had decided to cough up a secret rather than keep it. Tally looked where she pointed. He looked at the badge again. He looked at Rhea. His careful smile ran away and left his face plain. "We're shutting this whole property down," he said, and the we landed heavy, like a gate. "No one steps near that field. No one touches anything else. Do you understand?" Rhea did not reply. She was watching the jawbone. Not the tooth, not the badge. The bone itself. Under the sheen of damp and the grit that stuck to it, the bone was marked with small lines, evenly spaced. "Those aren't teeth marks," Juniper said quietly, following Rhea's gaze. "They're scratches. Someone cut this. After." Tally lifted his head as if someone had touched him with a cold hand. "Who would?" he started, and didn't finish. Pard said, "You call the old-timers by their first names when you want to borrow a tool from them. You call the dead by their full names. That's the only respect we can give them now. Who was sheriff before you, Vern?" Tally swallowed. "Marcus Hobb." "And before Hobb?" Pard pressed. Tally's jaw ticked. "Reeve Calder." Rhea felt the world tilt. The wind went silent in her ears for a beat. Calder. Her name. The badge in Tally's hands felt heavier to all of them at once. Reeve Calder was my grandfather, Rhea said. He disappeared the year my father left. I was 6. No one spoke. The whole breathed. Behind them, the cows shifted. Dulce lowed in a voice that sounded too human. The ground at the far edge of the bruise patch whispered again, that long thin sound of dry earth remembering it knows how to flow. Dana's pen scratched the clipboard, then stopped. We'll need to, she began. The far lip slid. A section of ground the size of a pickup eased down, then sloughed off into the dark. Something clanked against something else, metal on metal, a sound that did not belong in soil. Juniper looked at Ortega. Ortega looked at Rhea. Rhea looked at Sheriff Tally. Don't, Tally said, but the word had no power to stop the thing it was trying to name into stillness. From the place where the earth had slid, a corner of metal showed, painted once a government green now the color of moss and regret. The corner had rivets. The rivets held. The exposed metal had letters stenciled on it in white made gray by years. Rhea did not breathe. She stepped toward it because everything that had brought her to this morning had been a series of steps toward things she could not name until she touched them. She wiped the grit with her sleeve until the first 2 letters came clean. U.S. The rest were still under the earth. And then, as if the ground wanted to have the last word, a second piece slid free beside the first, a flat plate with an oval handle sunk flush. A turnwheel, rust-locked, sat at its center. Rhea did not feel herself reach for it. She did not register Tally's hand on her shoulder. She did not even hear Pard's quiet "Don't, girl," that sounded like a prayer more than a warning. Her fingers closed around the wheel. It turned. Something in the field released a breath that had been held a very long time. A child's shoe, black and small and wrong with a little brass buckle, slid out of the gap and tumbled in the dust at Rhea's feet. Rhea's stomach went stone cold. For one impossibly clear second she saw her 6-year-old hands cupped under a creek for minnows, the laughter of a man whose face she could barely pull into focus anymore, the hard shine of her aunt's eyes when she said, "You keep the keys and mind your own holes." And then the metal door yawned wider with a slow, satisfied groan, and the air that came out was colder than dawn and sweeter than almonds and full of a smell Rhea had known only once, when she had passed the back hallway of the Mesa Blanca courthouse. Under the breath, under the smell, under the sudden silence of everyone who had been about to say a different sentence, there was another sound, a thin high something that started far under the earth and climbed. A small bell. It rang twice. And then something else inside knocked back. "Those aren't teeth marks," Juniper said quietly, following Rhea's gaze. "They're scratches. Someone cut this. After." Tally lifted his head as if someone had touched him with a cold hand. "Who would?" he started, and didn't finish. Pard said, "You call the old-timers by their first names when you want to borrow a tool from them. You call the dead by their full names. That's the only respect we can give them now. Who was sheriff before you, Vern?" Tally swallowed. "Marcus Hobb." "And before Hobb?" Pard pressed. Tally's jaw ticked. "Reeve Calder." Rhea felt the world tilt. The wind went silent in her ears for a beat. Calder. Her name. The badge in Tally's hands felt heavier to all of them at once. "Reeve Calder was my grandfather," Rhea said. "He disappeared the year my father left. I was 6. No one spoke. The whole breathed. Behind them, the cows shifted. Dulce lowed in a voice that sounded too human. The ground at the far edge of the bruise patch whispered again, that long thin sound of dry earth remembering it knows how to flow. Dana's pen scratched the clipboard, then stopped. "We'll need to," she began. The far lip slid. A section of ground the size of a pickup eased down, then sloughed off into the dark. Something clanked against something else, metal on metal, a sound that did not belong in soil. Juniper looked at Ortega. Ortega looked at Rhea. Rhea looked at Sheriff Tally. "Don't," Tally said, but the word had no power to stop the thing it was trying to name into stillness. From the place where the earth had slid, a corner of metal showed, painted once a government green, now the color of moss and regret. The corner had rivets. The rivets held. The exposed metal had letters stenciled on it in white made gray by years. Rhea did not breathe. She stepped toward it because everything that had brought her to this morning had been a series of steps toward things she could not name until she touched them. She wiped the grit with her sleeve until the first two letters came clean. U.S. The rest were still under the earth. And then, as if the ground wanted to have the last word, a second piece slid free beside the first, a flat plate with an oval handle sunk flush. A turnwheel, rust-locked, sat at its center. Rhea did not feel herself reach for it. She did not register Tally's hand on her shoulder. She did not even hear Part's quiet "Don't, girl," that sounded like a prayer more than a warning. Her fingers closed around the wheel. It turned. Something in the field released a breath that had been held a very long time. A child's shoe, black and small and wrong with a little brass buckle, slid out of the gap and tumbled in the dust at Rhea's feet. Rhea's stomach went stone cold. For one impossibly clear second she saw her 6-year-old hands cupped under a creek for minnows, the laughter of a man whose face she could barely pull into focus anymore, the hard shine of her aunt's eyes when she said, "You keep the keys and mind your own holes." And then the metal door yawned wider with a slow, satisfied groan, and the air that came out was colder than dawn and sweeter than almonds and full of a smell Rhea had known only once, when she had passed the back hallway of the Mesa Blanca courthouse. Under the breath, under the smell, under the sudden silence of everyone who had been about to say a different sentence, there was another sound, a thin high something that started far under the earth and climbed. A small bell. It rang twice. And then something else inside knocked back. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The bell's thin note trembled through Rhea's bones. It was the sound of a school hallway on a winter morning, of courthouse doors opening, of a hand tugging a string in a place that had not heard voices in years. Then that other sound came again, 3 quick knocks, close enough to echo, far enough to make the scalp tighten. Rhea did not move because moving would require naming what she thought she had heard, and she was not prepared to do that. Her fingers still held the turnwheel. The metal was colder than the air. The breath leaking from the gap tasted of pennies and bitter almonds and something older, like paper that remembered smoke. "Back up," Sheriff Tally said, his voice trying for command and hitting breath instead. "Back up now." Part's hand landed on Rhea's shoulder, warm, real. "Rhea." She stepped back 1 pace because Part asked. She would have stepped back into the Mesilla River if Part asked. The hatch shivered under its own history. A slow settling off to the left sent a thin sheet of dirt skidding into the gap. The bell jangled once more, 2 notes, then hush, like whoever had rung it had run out of arm to pull. Juniper swallowed audibly behind her mask. "That's a mechanical bell," she said, as if it mattered to call it by its proper name. "Not electronic. No power needed. Somebody tied it to something." "Or something's tied to it," Part said. Ortega, steady even when her eyes were not, moved Rhea and everyone else with small gestures until they stood upwind. Dana Reel fumbled for the radio on her chest, thumb trembling against the push-to-talk. She told dispatch to send everybody, the state environment, state police, EMS, public health, the kind of cold voice you learn on day 3 of a job you didn't think would be like this. "No one goes down there," Tally said again, louder, as if volume could nail the air in place. "This is a crime scene. Presumptive. Potential contamination." "Potential?" Ortega barked. "Vern," a crow fell out of the sky. My strips lit up like Christmas. "You need to stop qualifying your nouns." The cows shifted behind the twine of yellow tape like a congregation that didn't trust the sermon. Dulce stared with her heavy, patient eyes at Rhea, and Rhea felt the strange tug cows have on people who live near them, the older covenant, the one about grass and time. The bell didn't ring again. The knocking did. A different cadence this time, knock, knock, silence, knock, knock, knock. It sounded almost like a code taught to children hiding in a closet. Rhea knew codes. The county fair had run out of dollars before she did as a girl, and her father had taught her to count taps against her knee like a secret currency. She lifted her hand from the wheel and knocked once back against the hatch with 2 fingers before she could stop herself. "Rhea," Ortega warned. The hatch answered. Not with knocks. With a hiss, a slow, long exhale as if a plug had been pulled from the belly of the field. Dust rose and failed, baffled by a wind that wasn't there. Then the wheel turned itself a fraction in Rhea's hand, the metal shifting forward with a reluctant squeal. Tally drew his gun. It made a small, stupid sound in all that breath. Everyone back. Now. Rhea did not back again. The cold from the metal had moved into her hands. She thought of the jawbone and the badge, the way the gold crown had tossed sun into their faces like a dare. She thought of her father's laugh, a memory with holes chewed in it. She thought of the cows, hers now, sick and stubborn, and of Aunt Fenna's note, "Keep the keys. Mind your own holes." There had never been any such thing in Mesa Blanca County as your own hole. She took the wheel in both hands and turned. A noise like skin peeling from ice came as the seal gave up a fraction more of its long grip. The stink came with it. Everyone flinched but no one ran. The hatch opened far enough that the breath carried a sharper thread, old oil, wool blankets, tin. "Stop," Tally said, but he was watching himself in his mind as he spoke, how the news cameras would frame this angle, how his name would crawl across the bottom of a screen. The scene split to a hand's width. The bell didn't ring again. Something slid, metallic, then rested. There was a ladder. Rhea could see it. Steel rungs, coated once with something that had pretended it could stand time. The rungs descended into a throat of darkness that swallowed light in quiet gulps. "Seal it," Tally said, arriving at decision like a man stepping into a suit that fit too tight. "Tape it. Post it. No one touches this until the state gets here." Rhea looked at him as if he had suggested they go inside and make pancakes. "Someone's down there," she said. She didn't say "I heard knocking." She didn't need to. The sound was still shaking inside the bones of everyone standing around the hole. "Could be a timer on a spring hitting the bell," Dana said, hopeful because hopeful was the step between now and screaming. Old bunkers had, some had, alarm pulls. "You know. 4 kids. Kids," Juniper repeated, as if tasting the shape of the word in her mouth could make the air less bitter. "Who builds children into the earth?" "Civil defense," Pard said. "We built whole cities out of fear." Rhea tested the weight of the wheel again and felt it hold. She looked at Ortega. Ortega didn't nod. She didn't shake her head either. She held Rhea's gaze for a beat that set something like a line between them, then reached into the back of her truck and brought out a small case and slapped it into Rhea's hands. "Monitor," she said. "If it screams, you come up. If you taste bitter, you come up. If your head feels wrong, you are already too slow." Tally's face flushed. "What do you think you're doing?" "Being fast where it matters," Ortega snapped. "You barricade the road when the paramedic is already at the door?" "This is my scene," Tally said, volume higher now, and there it was, the note underneath, fear, and something else, something older, like the memory of the name Calder. Pard stepped between them because you don't let 2 people who think they're protecting you set fire to the barn. "Vern," he said quietly. "You want your name in the paper for keeping a woman from saving a life?" Tally looked toward the deputy as if there might be an escape hatch in the young man's face. The deputy was looking at the hole as if he were a boy again and too close to the river in spring thaw. Tally lowered the gun with a practiced show of reason. "You go down there, you do it harnessed, and you stay on a line." "We don't have a harness," Ortega said. Pard coughed like punctuation. He went to his truck and came back with a coil of rope that had likely pulled more cattle from arroyos than the county had ever confessed on forms. He tied a bowline at one end with hands that could do knots in their sleep and built a makeshift belay around the axle of his old truck. "I'm going," Rhea said. "You're not trained," Tally said. I'm the one the ground speaks to, Rhea said back before she could wrap the thought in a better sentence. It was true anyway. The pasture had learned her steps, the cow's eyes followed her. The duct-taped shed knew her shoulders better than any door ever had. If the earth was going to give up secrets, it would do it for the one who had hammered fence posts into its tired ribs. Pard tightened the loop around Rhea's waist and hips with the barest pressure that made the knot sit right without stealing her breath. Juniper clipped the monitor to Rhea's shirt and showed her the little bar that would go red and the wave that would shout. Dana tore a length of caution tape and tied it like a sash across the back of Rhea's belt to make her easier to see. Ortega put a hand on Rhea's cheek for a second as if she were checking for fever, then let it fall. Talk to us the whole time, Ortega said. Describe what you smell, what you see, what your skin says. Rhea nodded, though the nod felt ridiculous above a mouth full of iron and almonds. She turned to the hatch. She thought, wildly, of the child's shoe, its buckle dulled, the shape too small for the dirt that had held it. She swung a leg into the hole. The ladder had a give to it that spoke of years without boots. She tested the rung with her weight and it answered, still here. She went down one rung. 2. The light thinned to green. The breath from the hole turned cool on her forearms. The monitor on her shirt blinked calm. I'm on the ladder, she said up to the circle of faces, to Pard's line, to Ortega's steady voice. Air feels cool. Smell is, it's like old workshop and bitter. There's metal in it. There's wool. She searched for the shape. There's a sweet note under it. Not good sweet. Candy left in a hot glove box. Stay shallow breaths, Ortega said. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Rhea left her breath on the rungs and took more. The ladder ended 5 feet down in a small landing, then continued after a 90-degree corroded turn. She went as far as the landing and looked. Below, the throat became a room. It opens, she said. There's a floor. I see a bench, I think. A shelf. The bell was near. The rope attached to it ran up along the ladder shaft and disappeared into a pulley near the top, then down into the room. Someone had tied a loop at hand height. Someone had pulled it, not long ago, and the way underground means not long, within the week, within the slow time of a sealed space. She went down into the room because that was the next step and because stopping now would make all the other moments in her life suspect. The rope played through her hands in a whisper. The monitor remained calm. Her boots touched cement. They made a polite noise. The air hit her full in the face now, a cocktail of oil and thyme and the faint sickly almond that would never be peaches again in her mind. She held still as the ladder creaked above, as the line tightened against her hips, as the world learned this new shape. I'm down, she said, voice smaller against the listening dark. Room is 10 by 12, maybe. Ceiling is low. There's a cot. There's a little table. There's a shelf with jars. Labels? Juniper called, voice afloat on its own adrenaline. Rhea stepped closer. The jars were stout glass with screw tops banded by metal. Inside, she saw candy, hard peppermints gone colorless, something that might once have been jelly beans now melted into a solid jewel, and a jar of what the label called sugar cookies which had become a stack of beige coins. On the cot lay a wool blanket, army green, folded into itself as if a body had once been folded beneath it. On the table, next to a small oil lamp, lay a notebook. The notebook had a cover made of oilcloth, blue, scuffed. Notebook, Rhea said. I'm going to open it. Gloves, Ortega said sharply. I don't have. Juniper's arm appeared down the shaft like a magic trick, a box of nitrile gloves dangling from it on a length of survey tape. Leftover from fieldwork, she said. Take. Rhea slid her hands into the gloves and felt the ridiculous, necessary relief of a barrier. She opened the notebook. Inside, in tidy handwriting that tilted slightly right, were names and dates. July 3, 1981. Test. All supplies listed. Radio works. Water barrels half full. Vent lever sticks, apply grease. Reeves says no one will ever use this, but we will keep it anyway. Rhea read the names out loud without knowing she had started. Reeve. There's a Reeve here. Reeve called her. The rope at her waist trembled. She didn't look up. She turned the page. August 12, 1981. Drill again. Sheriff says county will cut funding. Reeves says he'll make up difference. Girls complain about the smell. Told them a little stink is the price of safety. Tied the belt a string for the little ones in case they panic in the dark. September 2nd, 1981. Ration rotation day. Lost a jar to heat. Boys say we should store ice down here for summer like the old people did. Laughing helps. Under it, in a different hand, the letters large and childish. We hate drills. We hate the bell. Reeves says we practice or we get snakes. Rhea licked her lips and tasted rust. She flipped forward. December 14, 1982. Sheriff Vern Talley, junior deputy then, visited. Said his cousin might donate a ham. Radio winter static. Reeve not sleeping. Says people in town don't want to think about sirens. Says people never do until the dust comes. She caught on the name and looked up into the darkness as if Talley's older face might float there. He was on the rim of light with his hands on his hips, looking down like a man trying to measure shame's weight. Keep going, Ortega said softly, giving Rhea a voice to follow. Rhea turned a page. The ink changed. The hand wobbled as if the writer had been writing standing up or while moving. There were smears she did not want to name. April 9, 1983. We are staying down here because of the sirens. The drill was not a drill. Reeves says stay. Sheriff said get to the shelter in the courthouse, but the air was wrong up there. We heard a sound like the mine groaning, like a train underground. Reeve told us to ring the bell if the door stuck. The bell is easier to pull when you are small. A child's handprint smeared across the next line. Chocolate? Dirt? Rhea did not want to know. She turned the page with greater care than she had used for any object in her life. April 10th. The radio says the mine pads failed. The men on the radio are calm, and I don't believe calm men. The air is bitter when we try the vent. We tied wet towels over our mouths like the pamphlet. There is a smell like almonds when I pull the towel away. Reeves says wait for the all clear. The littles are afraid. The bell is loud. We hung it above the ladder so they can reach. April 11th. Reeve did not come back from checking the other hatch. Rhea stopped. She looked back at the ladder because she needed something that would hold her if the floor did not. The line tugged gently at her waist. Parts silence came down the hole like a rope of its own. Other hatch, Dana said. What other? Juniper, courthouse, she wrote. There's a shelter there. Ortega, focus down. Rhea turned the page. A bead of sticky something passed from one sheet to the next like a seal. April 12th. Sheriff Vern came with 2 men. He said the courthouse shelter was full. He said we had to stay down until the air cleared. He said he would bring milk for the littles. Reeves' belt is by the door. April 13th. The men did not come back. April 14th. We took the bell off the hook because the littles would not stop ringing it. We rang it twice every hour for Reeve. It did not help. April 15th. The air tastes like pennies and almonds when we open the hatch a little. My mouth is sore. My teeth hurt. Hobbs says we have to conserve matches. We whisper now because sound shrinks a room. I can hear the cows above us when they walk. You can hear things when you are under the ground that you cannot when you are on top of it. You can hear your blood. The handwriting stopped. Rhea felt the flirting edges of the monitor's comm go jagged. She forced her breath slower. She flipped gently. Pages stuck and then came loose with a sigh. May 1st. A different hand, less tidy. Hob again. Rhea knew the name from Part's earlier recitation. Marcus Hobb had been sheriff before Vern. Hobb, she read. Hobb writes, "We have enough water for 6 more days for 12 souls. We had 13. We do not speak about that. The littles sleep. The bell is quiet unless someone needs a thing from the ladder man. Reeve is gone. I cannot say gone where." There were pencil marks after that, as if someone had pushed letters into the paper with a point too soft to last. There was also a drawing, a simple cattle brand, 2 C's back to back, their spines crossing at the top. Rhea recognized it like a photograph of a face she had not seen in 20 years. Calder. The old brand from the sign at Fenna's gate when she was little. She closed the notebook carefully and put it back where it had been. Some objects you don't carry unless the world is ending again. She looked around the room with new eyes now and saw, in the corner, a second door. It was smaller than the hatch and had a turn handle like the first, but this one had rusted to the shape of the wall. Above it someone had stenciled a word in shaky paint. Spillway. Second door, Rhea said. Marked spillway. Juniper's inhale crackled. Emergency exit. Or, water. Don't open it, Ortega said. Not yet. Not alone, Parr added from above. Rhea's lamp beam found a wall of shelves along the back. Not food. Not blankets. Boxes. Cardboard and wood, the topmost with writing in black marker. Property evidence, MBSD. The breath in Rhea's chest turned to stone dust. Sheriff's Department. I have boxes with evidence written on them, she said, voice gone thin. Tally swore again, louder this time, and it was not a human sound now, or maybe it was too human. You're not to touch that, he said. You will not. Vern, Ortega said. Stop. Rhea stared at the boxes until the letters aligned themselves into something she could believe. The top one had a date, 1983. The one under it, 1981. She lifted the lid of the top box with 2 fingers in the cautious reverence of someone opening a casket. Inside, in Ziploc bags that had yellowed and stuck, lay photographs. The one at the top showed the mine leach fields in black and white, the white brighter than truth. Men stood in the foreground, arms folded. One man's profile was familiar, younger, leaner, Vern Tally in a hat too big for his age. Another was Hobb. Between them, a woman with hair like a storm and her arm out as if she were warning someone not to step forward. Aunt Fenna. Rhea forgot to breathe. The monitor squeaked once and returned to calm because the body learns to live in places where breath goes short. She fumbled for the next photo. It showed a different angle of the same day, Hobbs' hand on Fenna's shoulder, his mouth close to her ear. The caption scrawled on the back in pencil read, Negotiation. There were also audio tapes, cassettes labeled with dates and words like counsel, mine, consent order and Calder, meeting, room 2. There were a handful of keys on a ring with a brass tag that said MBSD archive. There was a child's drawing mashed between papers, a house with a square window and a stick figure with a sheriff's star the size of its head. Rhea? Ortega prompted gently. Describe. She told them about the boxes. She told them about the photos and the tapes and the keys. She did not tell them about the drawing because some things you carry to the surface in your mouth or not at all. She slid the lid back on and stepped away. Something shifted behind the spillway door. It was a small sound, barely a mouse, except that it wasn't. It was a whisper of pressure, a flex. The door made the tiniest noise like it sighed back. Pressure change, Juniper said, quicker than the breath that took her. Outside air? Or water? Rhea lifted her lamp. She saw a chair by the door, a simple metal school chair with tennis balls cut and fitted over the feet to keep it from squealing on tile. On the chair sat another notebook, red this time, smaller. The cover had been slid under the chair leg to keep it from curling, the old trick of people who need the world to be more level than it is. I'm going to look at one more notebook, and then I'm coming up, Rhea said, her voice making a promise that made the rope at her waist slacken in relief. She opened the red cover. The first page was dates again, later now. June. July. August. Then a line that had been written with the point of a ballpoint until it cut the paper. August 2nd, 1983. If you're reading this, it means you came down the hatch and didn't use the spillway. Don't. The spillway still has air, but the sour lives there. It eats what you are. I keep the chair here so the littles don't lean on the handle. The bell is for Reeve. Below it, in shaky letters spaced carefully. The bell is for anyone who can knock back. Rhea pressed her lips together. She thought of the knocks. She thought of the idea that rooms remember. She turned another page. 3 words sat in the center where a pen had stopped and started as if someone had waited to write them until the dark permitted. I hear music. Coming up, Rhea said, and meant it with her whole body now. She put the notebook back, slid the chair farther from the door for reasons she did not interrogate, and backed toward the ladder. She felt the rope taut like a hand happy to be needed. At the ladder, she lifted her foot to the first rung and froze. There was a sound under the room that was not water and not air and not the bell. It was a hammer. Metal on metal. 2 hits. A pause. 1 hit. Rhea could not pull breath deep enough to describe it. She put her boot on the rung because the only thing worse than a sound you don't understand is being in the room with it when it makes itself a second time. Talk to me, Ortega said, her voice drawling slow now, a painkiller's voice. What do you have? Something's working under me, Rhea said. I'm on the ladder. I'm coming. She climbed, and the room confronted her with every want she had ever had to be different than she was and with every want she had ever had to be exactly this, stubborn, tired, mouth full of dirt, holding a rope like a gospel. She broke into the throat of the shaft and the light above made a metal of the dust. Hands came, Pard's first, then Juniper's, then Dana's, and they pulled her out with the gentleness of people rearranging a sleeping child. Rhea didn't cry. She had used those tears somewhere else in a year that did not deserve them. Air okay? Ortega asked, peering at the monitor. Okay enough, Rhea said. If okay is a tent that leaks. Tally didn't let her stand. He knelt in front of her with an urgency that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the boxes she had named. You didn't. I didn't take anything, Rhea said. I looked. There's evidence. Photos. Tapes. A ring of keys. She swallowed. My aunt is in one of the photos. With Hob. With you. Tally closed his eyes for a breath like a man who hears a hymn he didn't expect to miss. When he opened them his careful smile was gone again and what remained under it was not a better thing. We secure it, he said. We wait for the state. We do not tell the press what's down there. We tell the press everything, Dana said. Her voice shook but held. We tell them the county put children in a hole. We tell them we poisoned our own ground. We tell them we found a jawbone wearing a badge. Tally turned slow when his eyes landed on Dana's clipboard like it was the tall grass that cut his calves. You like your job, Dana? She likes her mirror, Ortega said. You should try one. Pard made a noise like someone had put down a heavy bag they had carried too long. Enough, he said. We've got cows breathing the same wind. We've got a hole that eats crows. We've got a room full of history the county forgot on purpose. We can fight about who gets to life first after we keep something alive. The state came with trucks that sprouted antennas like weeds and people in suits that made them look like careful ghosts. They put up more tape, brighter tape, and rapped on the hatch with their knuckles and were surprised when the bell answered. They asked questions that had check boxes printed under them. They asked Rhea if the monitor had whined and looked disappointed when she said no. News vans appeared after lunch from the city 2 hours south like birds that smell a different kind of carrion. A woman in a dress too clean to have met a fence post looked at the hole as if it might spit on her shoes. She pointed a microphone at Rhea and said her name wrong and then corrected it when Rhea corrected her. She asked what it was like to inherit a secret. She asked how it felt to find a jawbone. She asked how it felt to live where the county had buried its memory. How does it feel to keep 10 cows alive when the ground wants them? Rhea asked back, and the woman blinked and executed a graceful retreat to the nearest official who would speak like a brochure. The emergency manager from the state, a woman named Hygiene Park with eyes that said she had tracked more than one disaster through its messy adolescence, stood with Rhea at the fence and watched the crew in suits set up fans and tubes that hummed like bees. "We'll vent it properly," Hygiene said. "We'll pull air, sample, scrub. We'll inventory what you saw with cameras before we touch anything. And we'll call the university for groundwater mapping." "Will you call the ghosts?" Rhea asked. She hadn't meant to say it. It sounded like a child to her ears. But Hygiene nodded like Rhea had asked about maps. "The ghosts have better lawyers than we do," she said dryly. "And longer memories." Dulce lowed, the deep sound of a body conferring with Earth. Rhea went to the pen and leaned her face against Dulce's forehead the way you do when you need a head steadier than yours. As the day unwound, as the fans hummed and the reporters rehearsed and the county men tried to look as if their hands had not touched any of this, the ground offered another opinion. The spillway door rattled under the earth, just once, just enough that the hazard tape above trembled like a tremor had passed through the word danger. Hygiene looked at the hatch as if she could see the second door through dirt by the shape of the air. "Pressure," she said. "Storm coming in tonight. Barometer dropping. Subsurface voids don't like storms." "Storm?" Rhea repeated. The sky was flawless, a blue that had not yet learned how to lie. "Out west," Hygiene said. "March is quick over flat places." Pard said he would stay on again with his thermos and his rifle he refused to uncage. Ortega said she wouldn't sleep if someone didn't make her. Juniper handed Rhea a water bottle and a granola bar with chocolate chips gone slick. Dana stood at the edge of the reporters like a guard dog who had noticed that the line she'd been asked to guard fenced only the wrong field. Tally disappeared for an hour and returned with an iron shirt, the worst kind of armor. By dusk, the wind had turned. It came from the west, a mouth that was all teeth. The mesquite leaned east like gossip. The clouds stacked clockwise like chairs in a church hall after a funeral. Lightning made far blue stitches under everything. The state crew battened down instruments and tied tarps over what could not be moved. They set a small tent over the hatch like a hat and weighted it as if it could be persuaded to stay through weather by courtesy. "You go inside," Pard told Rhea, not because he wanted to be her boss but because he would have told Aunt Fenna, too. "That shed will complain less than the sky." Rhea wanted to argue that the shed had a hole in one corner where a skunk had given birth to two polite kits, that the roof leaked along a seam like a bad memory. She didn't. She helped Pard secure the water troughs and move the mineral blocks under any shelter she could find for the herd. She looped a rope loosely around Dulce's neck and tied it low to the fence so that if panic took the others and they moved as a single animal, Dulce would not be ground into the boards. She put out buckets because cows drink more when it storms, like airplanes descending make people swallow. The first fat drop hit and raised dust the way a coin makes a small bloom when it lands in a fountain. The second came like a slap. Then the sky let go. Rain poured down with a speed that made men swear. The hatch tent danced. The fans lost their hum and the generator complained and then found itself. The reporters fled to their vans to fix their hair and their stories. The state crew huddled under a tarp and laughed because if you didn't laugh at the sky when it tried to erase you, you gave it too much power. Rhea ran to the shed, then turned and ran back because the hatch tent was shuddering. Hygiene, Ortega, and Juniper were already on it, resettling the weights, hand over hand, voices a chain. A gust came sideways and took the tent's corner up like a kite. The hatch was exposed for a heartbeat, long enough to flash its will like an eye. Rain went down into that eye, and the bell rang, not the tinny thread of the morning, but a fuller note, a rope yank. Juniper grabbed the corner and hauled it down. "Who tied the bell?" she shouted over the rain. "No one," Rhea shouted back. It was already tied. They secured the tent again, and as they did, the spillway under the earth protested like something older than their words had rolled over. "Pressure," Hygiene said grimly. We need to open that under supervision before the storm sets its own schedule. Tally pushed through rain and put his face under the tent edge. No one opens anything, he said. We hold. We wait for morning. The ground won't wait, Hygiene said, her tone the kind you use on subjects and subordinates. You can arrest weather? Tally stared at her as if one of them had proposed a thing he could not arrest and the fact insulted him. He looked at Rhea then, as if she might be the lever to move this. She was not interested in being moved. Morning, she said to Hygiene, none of us will be steady if we fight it tonight. We barricade. We pack soil around the tent skirt. We put sandbags. We keep the cows upwind. We breathe. Breathing is a good plan, Ortega said dryly, hauling sandbags like this were the only old dance her body hadn't forgotten. They did as Rhea said because sometimes leadership is just saying what work looks like when fear is louder. By full dark, the tent sat tight as a lidded pot. The fans hummed again. The yellow tape snapped like chatter. The cows pressed together, a single heat, and Dulce tolerated the rope and the storm with the noble insulted patience of a creature who has watched weather longer than people. At midnight, Rhea and Pard traded cups of coffee that tried to be courage. Hygiene wrote notes under a tarp that made her notebook into a tiny, lit city. Ortega catnapped in the driver's seat with her hat over her eyes. Dana typed into a document that asked every few minutes if she wanted to save changes, which was a question the day hadn't thought to ask. Lightning walked the horizon without asking permission. Thunder counted after it like a stern ant, 2, 3, 4, close enough. The spillway door beneath the field groaned. The sound rose through the dirt like an animal's name. Rhea felt it in the soles of her feet. Dulce threw her head and the rope went taut for a second and then slack because Rhea was there with hands and a voice she made into a field against the storm. The groan came again, longer. There was a clank. The bell rang once, a single clear tone that made the hair lift on Rhea's arms. Hold, Hygiene said softly, not to any of them in particular but to the idea of the night. Hold, Pard echoed, though he was watching the west where the darkest body of the storm marched. Hold, Rhea repeated to Dulce. The storm did not hold. It broke something in the north with a sound like a tree changing its mind too late. The wind sheared across the field, picked up the light sand, and flung it into their teeth. The tent bucked. The fans died and returned like a man who falls asleep in church and startles himself awake. The hatch wheel stuck out briefly as the tent lifted again. Rhea saw it glint and thought of how easy it had turned that morning for her hands. Another gust tore the tent's back seam. It went with a ripping sound that unstitched the hours of care they had put into being steady. The hatch lay naked now, rain hitting it hard enough to echo. Sandbags. Hygiene yelled. Weights on the corners. They ran. The world tilted. The tent tried to leave the county and failed when Pard flung himself onto the nearest flap with the heroic lack of dignity he had made his brand. Rhea got to the wheel and put both hands on it because some part of her that was older than the county told her if the wheel turned now, this story would not be theirs to tell. She held it as the rain turned her hands into slick ends of rope. The wheel was cold. It bucked once under her grip as pressure moved below. The bell rang again. A different note this time, lower, as if the rope had swollen with rain and weighed its own idea down. Rhea! Juniper shouted. Back! She didn't back. She fitted her heel into a crack in the concrete pad where the hatch seat bolted. She braced. The wheel strained against her. For a heartbeat, Rhea felt a pair of hands on the other side of the metal. Not real. Old. Memoried. The feeling passed, and with it, the pressure eased. The tent came down again. Sandbags found new homes. Hygiene tied the torn seam to itself with zip ties that cut her fingers but made the fabric remember duty. The fans coughed and steadied. The generator leveled out like a heart that had remember a beat. Rhea let go of the wheel with fingers that didn't want to uncurl. Pard caught her elbow without comment. They stood with the rain running down their noses and stared at the thing they had pinned back into the earth for the night. Morning, Hygiene said, more to her watch than to them. 5 hours. Then we do this my way. At 4, the storm ran out of stories to tell and went to bother a different county. The clouds shredded. A wind came up from the south with the smell of creosote in relief. The field steamed like a beast. Rhea walked the fence and counted cows at first light because the body insists on habits when the mind has seen too much. 10 heads, she stopped. Wrong, 9. Her stomach dropped. She circled the pen again. Dulce. The red with the star. The big black with the scar. The 2 white-faced heifers. The Jersey mix. The pale brindle lost last night under the tarp. The small gray, she ticked them off, lips moving, feeling ridiculous and holy. The missing one was the youngest, a heifer with a silly face and a stubborn streak, the kind that climbs fences just to prove it can. A gap had opened in the far corner where the storm had thrown a branch and the fence had given like an old promise. Tracks led toward the bruise patch. Rhea followed them with a kind of calm panic that doesn't let you run because running makes more noise than the moment can hold. The tracks went straight to the hazard tape and stopped because cows respect ribbons better than they respect wire. The ground here was softer from the rain. A hoof had sunk near the edge and dragged a little and then pulled back, leaving a smear of black clay like a question. Rhea, Pard called softly. Here. He was on the other side of the field, beyond where the tape had been extended the day before. Another set of tracks led that way. The heifer had skirted the forbidden like water finds a new course. The tracks went to a shallow depression that had not been there yesterday. There was a sound from under it, faint, muffled by wet dirt and the new quiet of morning. A calf cried. Rhea's heart did a thing she had not given it permission to do. She dropped to her knees and put her ear to the ground like a character in a book her father had read aloud when the nights had been big and kind. The cry came again, thin, insistent. Spillway, Juniper said from behind, breathless. It connects. Of course it connects. They always connect overflow to a lower point. You can't open it here, Hygiene warned. Not without. It's a calf, Rhea said, and hated that her voice shook with 1,000 other animals whose cries she had not been near enough to hear. It's alive. Pard was already on his belly with his ear to the ground like the county's old telegraph had started back up. He closed his eyes and moved his right hand across the dirt like a dowser. His hand stopped. He pressed. The earth gave, slightly. Here, he whispered. The spillway door's a foot down. Hygiene crouched, her face angled toward the ground like she wanted to argue with it. She didn't. We dig fast and careful, she said. No picks. No heavy tools. Buckets. Hands. They dug with their hands because there are mornings where your palms are better than any steel. The dirt was wet and heavy and leaned back into the hole. Juniper fetched buckets and they passed them back like a brigade. Dana set aside her clipboard and moved earth like a woman who had once been a child with a sandcastle. Tally did not join until Pard looked at him and didn't say anything. The looking worked as well as any order. Then he dug, jaw clenched, the cuff of his iron shirt brown at the edge. They found the door. It was a rectangle of riveted metal smaller than the hatch, set into a skirt of concrete. The wheel on it had rusted into a sculpture. A bar across the center had a padlock, and the padlock had been cut once, long ago, and then locked again with a new one stamped MBSD. Keys, Ortega said. Rhea, you said there were keys down there. In the evidence box, Rhea said. The calf cried again, closer. We don't have time to do this right. Doing it wrong gets people dead, Hygiene said, voice flat. And calves. Pard stood and trotted off with a speed Rhea hadn't seen on his frame in a decade. He returned in a minute with bolt cutters that had hung in his truck since the day his wife made a list of things to keep near and then died, and he kept the list anyway. Hygiene didn't argue. She set the cutter's jaws on the lock. Everyone hold their breath, she said, more theater than chemistry now. If this is charged, we get 1 second. She cut. The lock fell. The wheel held. Tally grabbed the wheel and strained. It didn't budge. He swore under his breath and stood aside because there are moments even men in iron shirts recognize the need for someone stronger in a different way. Rhea put both hands on the wheel and turned. It resisted, then sighed, then moved. It took 3 full turns to loosen. She set her shoulder to the door and pushed. It gave a sound like tin dragged across slate and opened a hand's width. A breath came out. It was cooler than the morning. It tasted of stone and a music that wasn't sound. The calf cried again, right there, a note of fury and fear that made Rhea's bones answer allegiance. She reached into the gap with her arm and felt space, then hair, then the wet blunt skull of a newborn calf. How, Juniper began, then stopped because the world was busy. Rhea slid her hands along the calf's head to the ears, found the curve of the jaw, and cupped it. "I've got you," she said, and her voice went into the hole like a vow. "I've got you." "Easy," Pard said, not because he needed to say it but because saying it helps the hands remember how to be. Rhea pulled. The calf's head came, then stuck, then came again with a wet sound that dyed the morning a different color. The body slid after, legs folded under, slick and furious. Rhea fell back into Pard's lap with an armful of new life that kicked the air like someone who had been told a lie and knew it. They laughed. They actually laughed. Even Tally laughed, and the sound made his face look briefly like a person Rhea might have liked if he had been born in a different county or inside fewer secrets. The calf bawled. The herd answered. Dulce tugged at her rope like a woman who wanted to go to church and had been told the pew was closed. Rhea wiped the calf's nose with her sleeve and rubbed hard along its ribs the way Pard had taught her when she was 9 and a neighbor's cow had calved wrong and women had done the work because the men were drunk and trying not to be. The calf's eyes opened. They were blue for now, the way young eyes are. They saw mess and light and faces and decided to object, then decided to live. "Where's the dam?" Ortega asked, already scanning the herd. Rhea pointed toward the far fence. The silly-faced heifer stood there, sides heaving, tail raised, her body making the shape of a mother around the absence of her child. Rhea brought the calf toward her and the heifer made a noise that rewrote the morning into a better language. The calf found the teat and life's oldest contract got signed in milk. They let the moment stand because if you don't, you teach the day bad habits. Then the door breathed again. Rhea's skin prickled. She bent and put her ear to the gap. Beyond, in the cool, she heard a sound. Not the hammer this time. Not the bell. Something that moved like ribbon on air. "Music," she said, and didn't know she was doing it. "I hear music." Juniper caught it too. "Wind? Through a tube?" Hygiene shook her head. "Air through a narrow, like an organ pipe," she said. "An old one." "Or a radio," Pard said. "One that never got turned all the way off." Dana closed her eyes. "Don't say that." The door edge went cold under Rhea's fingers. The taste of almonds rose and then lowered like a tide that had changed its mind. The ground, having given them a calf, seemed to be considering what else it might give or take. "What do we do?" Rhea asked, not to Tally, not to Hygiene. To the new morning that still had storm in its bones. "We close it for now," Hygiene said. "We mark it better. We keep idiots away. We bring cameras. We go slow." Tally nodded, slow as if he had decided to pretend he had suggested it. "We go slow," he repeated. "And we keep the press from seeing any of it." Rhea slid the door shut. It settled with more reluctance than she liked. She spun the wheel until it resisted. Pard looped a chain through the bar because history asks for layers. Hygiene took a number of photos that would fill 3 reports. They stood up. The day felt hot already despite the wet ground. The calf nosed into life with the joyful greed Rhea adored in babies of any species. The herd relaxed a fraction, the kind of shift you only notice if your heartbeat lives with theirs. The fans by the hatch hummed a little louder as the generator found new evenness. The tent stopped trying to leave the county. The reporters slept in their vans with one eye open for scandal. Rhea wiped mud from her hands on her jeans and thought about washing and then didn't because some mornings you wear the ground like a thing you owe and that is how you get through the next one. She looked at the hatch and thought of the notebook's line, "The bell is for anyone who can knock back." She looked at the jawbone wrapped in Pard's handkerchief and thought of the scratches that were not teeth. She looked at Tally, who was looking at the field as if it might call him by his childhood nickname inside its dirt. "We go slow," Hygiene said again, as if putting the words into the air would thicken it into something that could hold. They did not get the chance. 2 state trucks had just turned onto the county road from the highway when the spillway door thumped under the earth hard enough to startle the heifer into stepping sideways. Dulce threw up her head again and the calf neglected his new job to look at the ground as if it had called his name. The door thumped again. The bell down the hatch rang once like a judge's gavel. "Pressure equalization," Hygiene said, but she did not sound like a woman narrating a phenomenon now. She sounded like a woman listening at a keyhole. The wheel on the spillway door spun a quarter turn on its own and stopped. The chain Pard had threaded stayed. The padlocked bar stayed. The door breathed. Rhea stepped forward before she had finished deciding to. She set her palms on the metal. It was cool. It vibrated faintly, brisk as a cat's purr. The vibration stopped. Silence held, then broke. From behind the door came a voice. It was not a full word. It was the ragged, hoarse edge of a syllable that had not been asked to be a sound in a long, long time. Rhea's body did a thing entirely out of sequence with her brain. She fell to her knees and put her face close to the seam and said the first 2 words a human ever says to a stranger in a new world. "Hello. Hello." There was an answering scrape. The voice again, slightly stronger, the shape of a vowel scuffed by a lifetime of not being asked to climb back into air. "Low," it said. Pard's hand found Rhea's shoulder. Hygiene's eyes were too wide. Juniper's hand went to the monitor as if data could redeem them from whatever this was. Tally took 1 step forward and stopped as if he had met a door inside his own head that had not swung on its hinges in 40 years. "Who's there?" Rhea asked, and she did not care that there were a dozen better questions and 100 worse ones. Silence. Then, a breath through the seam, the faintest hint of a second voice, younger, either closer to the door or closer to the world. "Bell," it said. "Bell." Rhea pressed her hands hard enough into the metal to know she would feel the door in her palms for the rest of her life, like a scar. She looked up once at Ortega and at Hygiene and at Pard and at the sky. "We're opening it," she said. "No," Tally began, but the word went nowhere because at that exact moment the chain around the bar snapped of its own accord, bright metal biting bright metal, and the wheel spun another quarter turn under Rhea's fingers as if someone on the other side had found the other handle and remembered how to want. The door shuddered. The calf bawled. The bell rang twice, high and pure. Rhea pulled. The spillway door moved in a slow, terrible arc, and a band of cold air unrolled across the mud. The smell of almonds rose and then broke like it had been tricked. The seam widened. The first thing through the gap was a hand, small, pale under grime, wearing a ring made of red thread. It reached up toward light that hit it like a story. And then a voice behind them, a reporter's, too bright, too hungry, shouted, "We're live." Rhea turned her head just once and saw her own hands on the wheel on the little screen in the van window, the words breaking news crawling under an image that did not know the names of the dead. She turned back to the door. The hand in the gap flexed. She reached down to meet it. The earth under her knees shifted again, a subtle tilt, as if the ground were making up its mind between keeping and giving. And from the darkness beyond the hand came a third voice, deeper, broken on the edges the way a radio breaks on static, saying a name that made Rhea's blood forget its manners. Calder. The wheel jerked in her hands. Something on the other side pulled back. And the spillway door slammed shut with a force that shook the field and made the jawbone on Pard's truck rattle in its cloth. The chain fell in 2 pieces into the mud. The bell below rang and rang like someone was pulling it with both fists. Rhea stared at the metal that had bitten her palms. She set her shoulder to the wheel. She turned. She turned. It did not move. Above her, the morning thinned. The herd shifted. The reporter held her microphone up to a hole the county had spent 40 years training itself not to hear. Rhea closed her eyes once against a world that had refused to be reasonable. Then she put her hands back on the wheel. She inhaled. She exhaled. Again, she said. She leaned her weight. The spillway whispered back, "Not yet." And faintly from inside, as the bell clanged, the third voice spoke her name one more time, clear enough to slice the morning clean in two. Calder. Calder. The name hung in Rhea's mouth like iron. It was the last word of a dream remembered at the moment of waking, a hook caught in the thin skin behind the heart. The spillway door was a cold shoulder against her palms. Her hands shook, not with fear but with a refusal, the particular trembling of a woman who had been told not yet by weather, by cows, by men with tidy smiles, and had pushed anyway. Not yet, the door had whispered. Not yet. Again, she said, and leaned all her weight into the wheel. It did not turn. From inside came the bell's thready clamor and a voice, two voices, scraped thin by air and years, saying what a person says when their tongue has to relearn light. Bell. Calder. Hygiene crouched with her ear at the seam, eyes flicking over the numbers on her handheld meter. Rain still dripped off the edge of the torn tent and tapped her hair like a slow, patient clock. The storm had marched off, but its weight remained in everything that had to hold a line against it. Ortega stood with a mask ready in each fist. Pard braced the doorframe with one shoulder as if he were the double of the hinge it needed. Tally kept a careful distance, one step inside authority, one step outside consequence. The reporter hovered with her microphone held high, live light softening the mud into something that looked like a set. Pressure's equalizing, Hygiene said. Something's moving behind it. If we pull wrong we collapse the air channel and bring sour into our faces. Then we pull right, Rhea said. Hygiene's mouth twitched, the smallest not quite smile Rhea had seen since this began. Right, she echoed. Or we make a new pressure path. Pard, you still know how to make a vent out of nothing? Pard looked at the sky as if air were one of his cattle. Find me 2 lengths of hose, a sheet of tin, and a prayer. Juniper sprinted, returning with ducting from the state truck and a roll of aluminum flashing that flapped like a fish. In 4 minutes the three of them, Pard, Hygiene, Juniper, had built a crude snorkel over the spillway seam, sealed with tape and hope. Hygiene set the small inline fan from the hatch rig against it and watched the gauge. Air's moving, she said. Slow. Good. We let it pull for 2 minutes and then we open a hand's width. 2 minutes, Ortega set into the air, so the air would know its job. The bell below rang once like thanks. Rhea forced her breath to be small and countable. 1. 2. 3. She kept counting because numbers were the only sentences her body trusted while the world negotiated with itself. At 90 she put her palms on the wheel again and met Hygiene's eyes. Hygiene nodded, and it was permission in the language of women who have had enough. Rhea turned. The wheel moved like a bruise under a sleeve. A quarter turn. Another. The chain that lay in 2 bright pieces in the mud smiled at her like a bad memory. She felt a glide give, then a snag. Someone on the other side jerked at the same moment, and metal thudded against metal, not in refusal now, but in clumsy cooperation. Easy, Pard murmured, hand light at Rhea's back, the way you steady a horse at a gate at once but doesn't understand. Rhea set her shoulder against the door and pushed. It opened slowly, reluctantly, pulling a cold ribbon of air up into the wet morning. The smell of almonds lifted and thinned under the fan's stubborn insistence. The seam widened. A hand appeared again, small, grime-paled, the red thread ring bright as blood against the gray. It groped toward the gap like a swimmer who has forgotten what shore feels like. Rhea reached. Their fingers met. The hand was warmer than the air. I have you, Rhea said, and the words didn't feel like promise so much as lineage. She lowered to her knees, slid her arm into the elbow, and found a wrist, then an arm so thin her hand made almost a circle around it. Mask, Ortega said. Juniper slapped a child-sized respirator into Rhea's free hand with the reflex of a medic. Rhea shoved it through the gap. Fingers fumbled, found the straps, pulled the cup over a face she couldn't see, the elastic snagging on hair that felt like straw. "Okay," Rhea breathed. "Okay." The small body on the other side wriggled, the way cats do when you try to lift them wrong. Rhea swallowed the surge of protect that rushed her throat and forced herself slow. Feet first, she coached, as if this were a ladder, a pool, a berth. A bare foot bumped the seam, toes curling against metal. Rhea took it in her palm, anchored, eased. The door gave another inch and the child slid, hips catching, then freeing, ribs counting under Rhea's fingers. Pard reached over her and caught a shoulder, and together they coaxed a person into the morning. She was a girl, 12, 13 maybe, her face hollowed and too lovely with it. The red thread ring bit into her finger where a callus should have been. Her hair was the color of dry grass and chopped blunt across her neck with a knife. Later Rhea would know it had been cut to keep it out of fans, out of gears, out of mouths. Now, she had time only to pull the mask away enough to see a mouth form a word. "Belle," the girl whispered, and her eyes slid past Rhea to the rope tied up in the hatch tent across the field, as if it were a holy object. "Who's with you?" Rhea asked. Calm. "Who else?" The girl's eyes did not quite focus. They went to Tally's shape and flinched, as if old silhouettes shook inside bone. They moved to Pard, steadied. To Ortega, settled. To Hygiene, widened. "My granddad," she said. The mask fogged on the exhale and cleared on the inhale, proof of a rhythm rescue workers listen for like musicians. "He don't like the bell. I pull it when he sleeps." "Granddad," Rhea repeated. Juniper's hand landed on Rhea's shoulder with a small hard press that meant, "We heard it too." Another hand came through the gap then, larger, the skin mapped with 1,000 dried rivers. The nails were cut square with a pocket knife. The wrist was looped with a leather thong dark with sweat. A watch face with a crack ran from 2 to 6. "Calder," a voice said from inside, a man's voice, rope burned. The single word held curiosity, accusation, and relief in dizzying equilibrium. Rhea's name hadn't sounded like her in a long time. But hearing it from dirt did something to its shape. She crouched lower. "Rhea," she said into the seam. "Reeve Calder's granddaughter." Silence, except for the bell that imagined it was still ringing. Then the man behind the door made a soft sound. Not surprise. Something older. Like a chair that knows the person who built it has come back into the room. "Help me lever him," Hygiene ordered, crisp again. "If he's been in low air, we take him slow or we drop him." "Copy," Juniper said, already setting the wedge they'd used to keep the door from eating their arms. They brought the man into light. It took longer. He was rope and wool and bone and a history of favors cashed and owed. He wore an old Mesa Blanca high windbreaker over a flannel shirt buttoned one too tight. His hair had been cut with the same knife as the girl's, but years earlier, the same practical hands. His face was familiar in the way old photographs shape your understanding of a town. If the jaw base had been wider, if the ears less willing, Rhea would have said his name before he reached the seam. He crawled into mourning and flinched as if it might be bright enough to burn skin. The girl pressed herself against his side the way a foal leans against a mare when the wind shifts. He lifted his face. His eyes were cloud blue and still frighteningly alert. "Marcus Hobb," Pard said, not as an accusation. As an inventory. The man nodded once, then looked at Tally with a gaze that cut 40 years back through clean shirts and careful practice to whatever boys had run this county before their bodies finished growing. Something like recognition, something like grief, crossed the space between them and failed to settle. Tally took one step forward and another back. "You're dead," he said without realizing, and then more loudly, to make noise to plug his own ears, "He's been dead." Hobbs' mouth made a wry shape it must have learned before Rhea's father was born. "Not yet," he said. "Cussed close." He tried to stand and nearly went down. Ortega and Hygiene caught him and made a chair out of their hands. Hygiene checked his pupils. Ortega pushed a pulse oximeter onto a finger that had stitched too many sacks of feed. Numbers blinked inside. Rhea took the girl's wrist and felt a hummingbird underneath skin. Water, Hygiene said, and Dana, bless her, detail drunk, appeared with the bottle that had the spout you give the sick, not the cap you give the thirsty. Hob drank like a man who had memorized etiquette even against death. The girl drank like an apology. How long? Hygiene asked, soft but clinical. The girl looked at Hob, a reflex older than the whole. Hob squinted, counted something only he could count. 3 nights, he said. Give or take a storm. We got in as it turned. The courthouse tunnel's fenced, but fences tell a man where to look. He breathed like the hole had taught him. I was checking locks, like I always did, and the spillway stuck with the pressure. Then the storm pinned it. Like you always did, Rhea repeated. He looked at her now as if he had been waiting for her face to arrive so he could be certain the calendar kept its duties. Someone had to keep an eye, he said. Your grandfather did. When they let him. The last sentence carried a weight that settled inside Rhea like a stone in a clean jar. Reeve, she said. The jawbone wrapped in parts handkerchief sat on the truck bed behind them. She didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. Hobbs' eyes flicked to the shape of the bundle without the motion of his head. Animals, and men who have lived inside dirt, learn that quiet. You found him, he said. It wasn't a question. Tally's careful face sharpened like a tool at a bench. What in the hell are you doing down there, Hob? He demanded, and the keywords aligned: sheriff, scene, authority. Hob took as deep a breath as his world permitted. Trying, he said, to keep the county from choking on what it buried. He looked at the reporters. He looked at Dana and her clipboard. He looked at Rhea, the girl, the cows, the hatch tent, the fans like bees. And I failed. No one spoke. The whole breathed for them. Start back there, Pard said, plain as fence post. Anyone who's going to be mad already is. Hobbs' hands twisted in the hem of his windbreaker like rope trying to remember not. The mine broke, he said. In '83. We knew the pads were sloppy before that, everybody knew, even if we said we didn't. The company was feeding fertilizer to profit, cyanide by the truck. Reeve went up against them. He wasn't sheriff then. He'd just stepped down. He'd say a man can step out of a badge and keep the part of him that was worth the medal. Hobbs swallowed. He called me. Said, Marcus, if you put your name on this consent order you better know it's not consent at all. It's the county's liver. He was right. I signed it anyway. Why? Dana asked. Not a trap. An inventory. Because the company told us the plume would stay north, Hobbs said. Because the state wanted it tidy. Because men like being told they didn't ruin something when they did. He tipped his chin toward Tally without malice. Because we were young and thought weather listened. He blinked slow. When the alarms went and the air tasted like a bad almond harvest, we had 2 shelters ready, the courthouse and the Calder field. Your grandfather built this one with his own hands when the county refused to pay a man who'd already stepped down. The plan was to open both and get the school kids under one and the littles and old under the other. We did. For a day. And then? Rhea said, because the notebook did not have then. Then the company sent a man with a federal smile and a state badge, Hobbs said. Said the courthouse shelter was the one that would be managed. Said this one, too far from town, too close to the leech. Said keep it closed until the vent cleared so no one could claim we'd suffocated them ourselves. Vern, he turned his head toward Tally with a grace that startled Rhea. You were a kid with a badge and you believed the man who paid for your gas. You posted at the courthouse. You came here with me twice with milk and numbers. We wanted to be good. We rang the bell and told the mothers to sing to the children and told the children not to pull the bell too much because it would use the air. You remember? Tally's face did something that would make a person look away if they loved him. I remember the bell, he said. I remember Reeves' belt by the door. Hobbs' hands stilled. Me too. What happened to him? Rhea's voice came out lower than she'd meant. The jawbone hummed in its cloth. Hobbs' eyes went to the field, not the door. He went back and through the spillway when the vent stuck. The pressure popped the hatch. The hinges were green. He pulled kids through one by one while I held the door and Vern ran milk. I told him to quit while the air was still a friend. He told me to quit being a coward in a way only Reeve could call you a coward and make you thank him. Then the ground under the catwalk went. He swallowed dry. We didn't pull him. Rhea's stomach lifted and fell as if a truck had hit a cattle guard. You left him. We looked until the air insisted, Hobbs said. We looked until I could taste almonds for a week with no nut in sight. We looked until the bell went quiet. He fixed his gaze on Rhea's face with an old man's right to ask forgiveness from someone who hadn't been alive to grant it. When we came back, days later, when the wind had a different idea, there was nothing but a lock cut and put back in a note on the courthouse desk from a company lawyer that said the consent order would cover everything and the county should consider itself fortunate. Who locked it back? Dana asked, the question filling its own clipboard box in her throat. Hobbs smiled like a tired saint. That's the story, isn't it? He tapped his chest. You keep asking it. You keep asking it with a camera on you and the door open. What have you been doing down there? Tally demanded again, as if repetition could become truth. 40 years, Hob. Not 40 years, Hobbs snapped, and the old sheriff found his voice in the modern man. I didn't hide in the earth like a badger. I checked. I kept the locks from rusting to the shape of our shame. I brought water when the courthouse line broke in '98 and the heat put old men in holes. I stopped kids from playing expedition. 2 nights ago, my granddaughter and he put his hand on the girl's head without looking. We went to check the courthouse gate because someone had cut it. We heard the storm walk. We went under to wait it and the pressure made this door a decision and my back forgot a younger calendar and we stuck. The girl made a soft sound that might have been apology and might have been stubbornness. I pulled the bell, she said, words crisp now. He told me not to waste the air. I pulled it anyway. It says someone hears you. Rhea felt the word "hear" settle into her chest like a warm thing settling into a hollow. The reporter took a step forward, found the edge of the circle of mud, and decided to love her shoes less than the moment. Sheriff, she said to Tally, breathless with the gift of life. Did you know Marcus Hobb was alive? Did the county maintain the shelters after the mine incident? What do you say to the allegation that evidence was hidden under a private ranch? Tally's careful face finally failed. What remained looked more like a human face than Rhea had seen on him yet. He looked at the reporter as if he could arrest her microphone. He looked at Rhea as if she were a gate he needed to go through. He looked at Hobb as if Hobb held the key. I say, he said slowly, that the county made mistakes. Men made mistakes. Me included. The words were raw as barbed wire in a new glove. I say we open one shelter and let the other sit because it was easier. I say I never knew where those boxes went once we put them aside to inventory later, and I should have asked. I say I don't know who cut the lock then, and I plan to find out. You plan to, the reporter echoed, all professionalism and polished eyes. I planned it today, he returned, and that was the first sentence he'd said that made Rhea believe she might not have to push this part uphill alone. Jean, who had been letting history rip its stitches while she watched the numbers that kept bodies alive, nodded once. Later, she said, we hold hearings. Now, we keep air moving and keep idiots from dying. She looked at Hobb. Hospital. Hobb made a face like a man told to sit at a table when there was still fence to string. I'll go after I say one thing. He turned to Rhea. Your aunt kept a better ledger than any accountant, he said. She hated county men, present company accepted, and she put locks on doors like curses. But she never let the ground swallow names. She wrote them in that blue book. If you found it, you found half the story. The other half is under the courthouse, in boxes the county forgot on purpose. He lifted a hand, and it shook just enough for Rhea to see the boy in him. Reeve didn't die because he was a hero. He died because he was stubborn and because men like me are better at signing papers than they are at ripping them up when they're wrong. Then rip them, Rhea said. Rip them now. Hob breathed. It's your rip now. They got Hob and the girl, her name was Lark, as if someone had put a promise in her mouth when she was little, into the ambulance. Ortega rode with them because she didn't trust anyone else to listen to a body the way necessary. Hygiene stayed by the hatch because pressure was a language she spoke better than any sheriff. Juniper posted herself at the spillway with a clipboard that could take a punch, taking notes in a hand that would one day be admired by grad students who hadn't yet had dust in their teeth. Dana began making lists that school boards would hold over their coffee like prayer sheets. Tally stood with his hands low, the way men who have learned they are not the center of a room finally stand. We need more deputies, he said to no one in particular. We need to close the courthouse access and open it at the same time. You need to go on record, the reporter said. Tally nodded and did the thing he had been trying to dodge for 40 years. He told the truth on camera. It wasn't clean. It wasn't complete. It was enough to call people who had studied law more recently than greed. Rhea walked the fence. She needed movement, not microphones. Dulce leaned heavy into her palm. The calf-nosed and butted like milk was a verb that had to be conjugated into joy. The sky had the washed look of a face after crying, colors came back one at a time. The bruise patch steamed, but its breath was thinner now, the fan coaxing the sour into filters. From the hatch tent, the bell rang once more, not with panic now, but with the insistence of history. Hygiene's crew lowered a camera into the ladder thrown on a cable, the image showing on a tablet, cot, table, the blue notebook, the red shelf of jars. The boxes marked evidence. A toy car under the shelf, blue paint flaked, one wheel missing. Rhea felt something ancient move in her ribcage that might have been laugh or sob. Inventory will wait until we can hold our breath for it, Hygiene said, never taking her eyes off the ppm. But we're not leaving it under the field again. Tally startled himself by agreeing. By noon, the county road sang with vehicles that had lanyards and clipboards and a kind of brisk apocalypse in their step. People came to fix. People came to witness. A woman with a bag that said public defender came and looked at the hole like it owed her money. A man from the mine company, new logo, same careful smile, came and tried to stand where the camera would cut him kindly. Dana and the reporter and Hygiene aligned against that as if they'd practiced. Rhea kept moving. She hauled water like old women haul grudges. She set out mineral blocks in the shade in a neat row that looked like tombstones and refused to consider the poetry of that. She salted feed with selenium the way Ortega had told her, copper with care. She built a shade with new tarps that would flap less, had more tie points, would forgive the next wind its opinion. She was carrying a hay bale she had no business lifting alone when she saw the dog. It stood at the far end of the field, just outside the newly extended tape, tail low but not tucked, muzzle dipped as if reading the dirt. It was coyote-colored but not coyote. It looked at Rhea and went still like a photograph. Then it trotted closer, careful, and sat down at the spillway door as if meeting a train. "What do you know?" Rhea said softly. The dog blinked. It stood and sniffed along the seam and made a soft frustrated whine. Then it lifted its head and howled once. Not coyote. Domestic. A sound taught by porch light and kitchens. Pard came up beside her. "That's Asta," he said, surprising her. "Belongs to a woman out on County 12. She went missing 2 days ago. They found her truck by the courthouse. Dog was gone." The canine pressed its nose harder to the seam and tried to stick its tongue under the lip as if to give water to a friend. Rhea's stomach made a fist. "Hygiene," she called, not loud, but in the key that announces an urgency that isn't panic. "We've got another voice." She nodded at the dog. "His." They listened. The fan hummed, the bell rope moved slightly as if it had learned to breathe, and from behind the door, closer now than morning, quieter than Hob had been, they heard something that might have been a cough and might have been the rust speaking to itself. Asta whined again and pawed the seam. Pressure's better, Hygiene said, eyes on the readout. We can open another inch without inviting the sour to breakfast. She looked at Rhea. If you're game. Rhea was made of game now. They opened the door slowly and late afternoon cool slid against their ankles. The dog shoved its muzzle into the seam and inhaled like it could locate a person by the shape of their breath. It wagged once, a stuttering flag. Hey, Rhea said into the door. Hey there. We've got you. She didn't know who she was talking to. It didn't matter. A hand appeared. Not small this time. Not old. Middle. Woman's. The nails were blunt and bitten. Dirt made half circles under each. A bracelet of pink plastic beads dug into the flesh of the wrist. The hand flexed. Rhea took it. A face followed, hair stuck to sweat, eyes wild until they hit the dog shape. Asta, the woman said, and the sound broke into 3 pieces and put itself back together again as the dog leaned its whole body into the seam to lick her fingers. They got her out. She was dehydrated, oxygen dumb, furious that she had been stupid enough to go exploring with the stonewalking and the courthouse gate easy as gossip. She apologized to Rhea as if she had borrowed a cup of sugar and spilled it on the rug. Then she laughed and cried into the dog's scruff and the calf bawled again and the air learned another note for its cord. By evening, the hatch room had given up its boxes. Not all, not even half when you count how long a county's arms are. Enough. Rhea carried the blue and the red notebooks up herself with nitrile gloves like wedding gloves. People watched the tapes go into evidence bags that had next chain of custody forms taped to them like name tags at an awkward community picnic. The reporter ran out of breath and learned to breathe again. Tally took 3 phone calls in a voice that had lost some careful. The mine company man tried to leave and found his car boxed in by cows who had decided his bumper tasted like a mineral lick. And for a few hours, under a sky patched back together by sunset, Mesa Blanca County remembered how to be a place where people keep each other alive first and keep their jobs second. That night, Rhea sat on the porch of the shed with Pard. The jawbone lay between them on the step in its cloth, not because they were treating it casually, but because they wanted it where they could see it. They weren't going to put it back in the ground and pretend the ground took responsibility. Reeve wore the badge under his shirt, Pard said, sipping coffee that had boiled too long. Said it kept his bones honest. Someone cut the jaw after, Rhea said. Pard nodded. I seen men take trophies when war makes them stupid. I seen men thread bones on a string and forget they knew better. Rhea didn't look at the tent where Hygiene and the state sat with their humming bees. She looked at the cows, her cows, and counted heads in the dusk without needing to see their faces. 10 again. Then she made her mouth practice the truth. 9, she corrected herself. She would not forget the brindled heifer who had folded before she knew she was allowed to stand again. You did good work, Pard said. Dulce has more shine to her. The calf's a right piece of trouble, which means he'll live a long time and break 6 fences. Rhea smiled without showing teeth. I named him Bell. Pard's grin creased the county 3 ways. Reckon that's apartment. In the morning, they opened the spillway properly with tripod and winch and fans that would have made the mine's safety officer proud if he had been born. They went into the tunnel toward the courthouse with lights that made the darkness polite. Hygiene held the readings like an instrument. Juniper held the map that grew with each step. Ortega waited topside with Kit ready to tell bodies they were okay. Rhea wanted to go. The part of her that had put its hands on a door and asked its life for permission wanted to go so badly her jaw hurt. She didn't. She stayed with the herd and with the woman from County 12 and with Lark, who had not let go of Rhea's sleeve since the hospital had given her back. Sometimes being the person who holds the rope is braver than being the person at the bottom of it. They found carvings in the tunnel walls where children had counted their bravery, tally marks grouped in 7s. They found a blanket nest near a bend where someone had hidden long enough to smooth the concrete with a body. They found the second evidence cache the county would have sworn under oath did not exist, a metal filing cabinet on a dolly with a rope still tied, the knot cut, the rope's end black with grease. Inside, files with the company's old letterhead, typed with the arrogance of men who have never had to lift a fence post. Agreement of understanding, leach pad stabilization, draft. List, community members to be managed. Media strategy, council compensation. And, at the bottom, in a brown envelope, a photograph of Reeve Calder standing in this tunnel, his hand on the second door, his face not smiling. Rhea touched the edge of the photograph with a glove and did not cry because there are griefs that would like to be loud and you do not give them that if you need your hands. They came up to midday and the county did a thing Rhea would never forget, it set tables and brought food. Women who had lost babies and men who had lost acres and teenagers who had lost the cortisol that came with not knowing what their phones would find made casseroles and beans and tortillas and cut watermelon and poured tea. They fed the state crew and the reporter and even the mine man, whom no one liked but whom they did not want to starve. They fed the cows, too, with apples taken by permission. The narrator on the TV in the van said words like accountability and legacy while showing Dulce licking a child's hand. In the shadow of the hatch tent, Tally stood with Hob, who had come back from the hospital against orders and because he did not know how to sit still while a hole he had guarded told on him. They didn't talk loudly. Men who have decided not to lie don't need volume. Rhea drifted close without pretending she wasn't. I signed it, Hob was saying, looking at the files spread on the hood of a truck. I signed it and put it in a drawer and then put the drawer in a hole, and now the hole spits it up. He touched the photograph of Reeve with one finger like a priest touching relics. I thought I was keeping one terrible thing from making us all crazy. Turns out I was just feeding it. You going to say that into a microphone? Tally asked. No malice. Possibly envy. Hob's mouth made an old shape. I am now. He did. The county listened with mouths full of beans, with hands full of forks, with eyes full of something like mercy. He said Reeve's name more than he said his own. He said Fenna's name once, and the way he said it made Rhea laugh unexpectedly, like someone had pulled air out of a joke she'd been choking on. After the news vans left, after the state crew set up a rotation that would keep the air honest for as long as the hole needed, after the cows lay down in the shadow of the news shade and chewed like their teeth could fix time, Rhea went down the ladder one more time, with permission, with a monitor, with Juniper behind her and hygiene above like a skylight, and opened the blue and red notebooks not like evidence now but like liturgy. She sat on the cot with the green blanket and read the names of children into the small room. She said each like it were a hinge and she were setting the door back on it. She read the line that said I hear music and listened. Under fan and hum and the far sound of tires on County 12, there was music, a radio someone had left on in their car 2 fields over, the tunes sliding down a pipe they had made without meaning to. She put the red book back under the chair leg where it would keep the world level. She checked the rope on the bell to be sure it rang for the right people now. She pressed her forearm against the concrete and felt the earth not angry, not apologetic. Just present. When she came up, the light had turned the field gold and the bruise patch a color that wasn't a bruise anymore. Pard sat on the porch step with the jawbone in his lap. He had wrapped it again and this time he was stitching the cloth shut with the neat little X's his wife had once taught him for quilts. What are you doing? Rhea asked. Making it so we have to cut it on purpose next time, he said. Reminds you to mean it. Rhea stood with her hands on her hips and looked at what the day had made. The spillway had a proper gate now with sensors that would match weather and pressure like a good marriage. The hatch had a frame around it and a lock that would open with a public key. Dana had insisted, bless her, that the library would keep. Hygiene's fans hummed like the world's lungs. Dulce raised her head and watched Rhea with slow love. Belle the calf tried to eat a reflective vest and was offended when the vest declined. Tally approached, hat in hand. He looked smaller without his careful. There'll be hearings, he said, as if Rhea had asked. There'll be men with clean hands pointing at men with dirty ones and we'll all take our turn in the chair. There'll be money we didn't plan to spend and money someone will try not to spend, and we'll make them. He swallowed. I'll lose my job or I won't. I'll keep my word either way. What word? Rhea asked. That we don't put our shame under your cows again, he said. He put the hat back on. That door will stay open when it needs opening. It'll stay shut only when the air says so, not a lawyer. He looked at the jawbone and then away. We'll put Reeve where he belongs. In the ground, Rhea said, because she had learned that day that burying can be either forgetting or remembering depending on who holds the shovel. With his name. With his name, Tally repeated. The sun slid a little and made the tops of the mesquite glow as if each thorn had taken a lesson in light. Lark came and sat beside Rhea without asking if she could, because once you've climbed out of a hole with someone you don't ask for permission to share their piece of wood. She scratched Belle's ridiculous forehead with the seriousness of a sworn oath. What happens now? Lark asked, because she was a child and brave enough to hate that word later. We keep them alive, Rhea said, nodding toward the herd in the hole and the town beyond it. We keep telling the story until the ground stops needing to. Do we ring the bell? Lark asked, looks flicking to the hatch. When we need to, Rhea said. When someone can answer. The evening gathered itself. Coyotes spoke to one another from the far arroyos, their yips like teenagers telling secrets. A night hawk stitched the first star to the sky. The hatch bell gave a tiny, accidental sound as the fan cycled, not panic, house noise. Rhea put her hand on the door one last time for the day, the spillway, not the hatch. It was warm from sun. It shivered once under her palm as if remembering when it had slammed and what it had kept. Inside her, something she hadn't dared to name all day finally stretched, pride. Not the kind that struts, the kind that sits on a step and breathes and says, we did this, and we'll do the next piece, too. In the weeks that followed, because time refused to stop just because a hole had been persuasive, the county dug test wells and learned to say plume on the first try. The state mapped and talked about clay lenses and confining layers as if they were cousins they hadn't visited. The mine company hired a consultant who told them to apologize and mend it. The courthouses downstairs became a small museum with an exhibit called The Year We Learned to Knock Back. The library kept hygiene's public key, and the poster over the desk read, Ask USTO open the door. Rhea's cows got fatter. Dulce stopped standing with her head low and took to head-butting Belle when he got ideas about chewing on people's zippers. Ortega brought shots and coolers and lectures in the bed of her truck. Juniper sat on Rhea's porch once a week and wrote field notes and told jokes that made Dana's clipboard tilt with laughter. Pard fixed the fence twice because Belle learned it and became a better teacher of fence after. Lark slept in Rhea's spare cot 3 nights out of 7 at first, then went home to a grandmother with hands like dry riverbeds and came back with pie. Every once in a while, in the blue hour before full dark, Rhea would walk to the spillway door and lay her palm on it and feel, not a knock, but a hum, the hum of air moving right, the hum of engines doing their unglamorous job, the hum of a county's breath returning to its nose. She would stand there until Dulce made the sound that means, we chew now, and Rhea would go chew with her. On the first day of fall, under a sky that had decided to be merciful, the county put Reeve Calder in the ground with his name. They used the words they had and borrowed better ones from a book in a church that had never expected to host this particular service. Hobbs spoke with a voice that had been sanded by regret and made reliable by it. Tally spoke like a man who had learned to like the taste of truth. Dana read the list of children's names from the blue notebook, one at a time, and afterward the townspeople said the names to each other like grace. Rhea didn't cry until she carried the jawbone herself to the hole they had made for it. Par had stitched the cloth shut with X's so small it would have taken a needle half the width of a gilt to cut them. She buried it gently and said out loud what she had decided to believe, he kept the part of him that was worth the metal. That night, after the last casserole had been claimed and the last folding chair had given up and leaned against a wall, after the reporter had bullied her producer into letting the final line be we keep each other alive, after hygiene's fans had settled into the pitch of contentment, Rhea took a chair outside the shed and looked at her field. The bruise patch was not a bruise anymore. The grass still came thin where the ground had drunk too long, but it was not a wound now. It was a seam, stitched and strong. The hatch gleamed a modest gray. The spillway door wore a plate that said public access, ask the librarian. The cows breathed the way cows do, like a statement without punctuation. Belle tried to climb into Dulce's flank and got gently taught to stand on his own 2 feet. Rhea inhaled. The air smelled of creosote and faint iron and the wild sweet of mesquite bloom. It did not smell of almonds. Lark came to stand beside her, sticky with peach juice. "You're going to keep it, right?" she asked, waving at the field as if it were something you could put in a pocket. "I'm going to keep it," Rhea said. "And it's going to keep me." She touched the girl's wrist where the red thread ring had once bitten and now was gone. In its place was a new ring, silver, made by a woman at the farmer's market who hammered hope into metal on Saturdays. "You're okay," Rhea said. Lark nodded. "I pretend to ring the bell when I can't sleep. In my head. It makes my breath learn again." "Mine too," Rhea said. They stood together until the night filled with crickets that had waited for their cue. In the silver dark, beyond the fence, the county exhaled like a sleeper who has been turned from their bad side. A week later, on a morning the color of new tin, Rhea woke to the sound of a truck in her drive and the polite tap of a knuckle on her porch post. She came out with coffee and found a woman with a camera case and a face that hadn't learned this county but wanted to. She braced for microphone and soundbite and a compliment that is meant to carry a hook. The woman smiled without angles. "I'm not here for a story," she said. "I teach at the junior high. I want to bring the kids. The ones who think history is a list of the names of men." She glanced at the field. "I want them to hear the bell." Rhea looked at the spillway plate, then at the librarian's number Dana had painted on a board by the gate. "Bring him," she said. "Let them pull the rope. Let them learn what they're saying yes to when they choose to live here." The woman nodded. "And if you ever want help with the cows, our 7th graders need to learn patience." Rhea grinned around her cup. "I've got a calf named Belle who will teach them how not to ruin a fence with enthusiasm." They shook hands like neighbors. The day warmed its hands on the stove of the sun. The field glittered where dew had found a way to pretend the desert had a different name. Rhea walked the fence. She slapped a post, it answered. She checked the shade, it held. She scratched Dulce in the pocket of skin under her neck where cattle lean into joy. Belle tried to fit his whole head into the grain bucket and learned that geometry is a moral law as well as a physical one. At the spillway, Rhea paused and put her palm against the door out of habit, or gratitude, or both. The metal was cool. It did not knock. It did not whisper. It just waited, as a good door does, for a hand that knows it. "Before we jump back in," she said, smiling at her own borrowed phrase and thinking of microphones and stories and how people need them until they don't, "tell us where you're from. If this story moves you." She laughed and shook her head. She wasn't a narrator. She was a rancher with 9 cows, a calf named for a bell, and a field that had given up its secrets. When the wind shifted, it brought the sound of the school bus on County 12. And, faint under it, as if the air were proud to show off its new skill, the bell in the hatch made the tiniest sound, just a kiss of the clapper against the cup, as the fan cycled. Rhea touched the door once more and turned back to the day. She had water to haul, a fence to mend, a friend to check on at the hospital, a librarian to call, and a 7th grade to warn about calves and truth. The wind lifted the hair at her temple and set it back down. The bruise patch sent up the smell of grass. The sky had room in it for weather that did not threaten. And in Mesa Blanca County, where the ground had finally knocked and someone had knocked back, life went on, not easy, not simple, but good. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.